situation like this in the past. Their government had to use nuclear warheads to neutralize the dungeon break since it was too overwhelming for their players. Furthermore, he says that was only possible because their disaster occurred in an uninhabited region in Siberia. Unfortunately, their country is in no position to implement such a solution. Hearing this, all the people standing outside the news outlet get sacred. Moreover, South Korea developed into chaos just as it did 10 years ago. Gu, with her team member in the helicopter, was exploring the city's situation. Sitting in the plane wearing an aviation headset, she says this must be the shield guilds doing those psychopaths. Then she turned and looked toward her companion, ordering her to call the National Intelligence Service and tell them to locate the shield guild immediately. After this, Gu remains silent. After thinking for a while, she asks where the president is. Her companion replies he was evacuated to an underground bunker, and his full authority has been delegated to her. Hearing this, she set her aviation headset and squeezed her eyes, sighing, asking if his full authority just meant he wanted her to die first. After this, the pilot of Gu's helicopter, looking outside the glass window, informs her they have located their target destination. Then, standing up in the air away from the red color shield, the pilot informs the Inchenfield dungeon is 2 miles ahead. The government created the red color shield to control the dungeon break, and when the shield breaks, the fire dragon comes out and destroys everything. Gu stares at the red shield from the helicopter window, and then orders her team members to send emergency notices to all the guild masters. On the other side, in the news outlet, 2 news reporters were discussing that matter with the professor. The male news reporter looking toward the professor asks, "Well, how can the government react to this situation, Professor?" The professor replies he is not sure, but if they are going by the books they will probably. Gu, in the helicopter, orders her team members to summon the top 100 players in South Korea to this location. However, the bright wavy light was coming out of the red shield. Meanwhile, Kim with his team member wearing physical armor got there. Kang was also with them, as he had become their team member. Kim stood before the red shield and said they were finally there while his team members were scared. Hearing this, the vice captain gulps and they all start trembling. Their hands are shaking and the vice captain stands there, thinking he knows why they are there. They are a hero to sacrifice their lives to buy some time. An orange-haired man. Kim's team members stand there sweating, thinking a fire dragon is not a creature they can deal with. Their job is to stall the monster as much as they can until the top 100 players arrive. They will most certainly end up dying if they enter this field. As they all were scared, meanwhile, Kang excitedly jumped up from them, looking toward the shield barrier, says it's so huge, so this is where the fire dragon lives. See Kang reacting like this in that complicated situation. Kim's team members get surprised. After this, the vice captain comes to Kim, and looking toward Kang he asks Kim what should they do with him. Captain, they brought him along since it was an emergency, but he hasn't been officially enlisted yet. Kim stands ahead of him and replies, just leave him be, he decided to follow them anyway. Then Kim remembers the time when he fought with the Kang in the military base ground. Remembering that time, he thinks, and they might have some use for him too. Then he steps ahead toward the shield, ordering his team members to let go of the shield. They all follow him, replaying yes sir. As soon as they enter, the shield starts making a loud noise and throws them out. They all thud on the ground backward except Kim. Vice Captain sits up and stares at the shield, thinking about what happened. The dungeon rejects them while Kim stands alone in the shield and surprisingly looks back. Then he stands inside the barrier, shield head down, and presses his lips, thinking he has never seen this happen before. Then he asks himself, is this what happens in an 8-star dungeon? After this, he presses his lower lip between his teeth and sighs, thinking he guesses he has no choice. He will have to go in alone. As soon as he believes this, suddenly Kang appears near him. Kim surprisingly looks toward Kang, stands beside him, and asks how he is. In return, Kang asks him what it is. Kim replies, never mind, let's go. As they both stood there, they decided to move ahead. Meanwhile, Taram, holding his weapon, ran toward Kim to kill him. Standing there, Kim feels that someone is behind him. He turns his head to look. As Kim looks back at Taram, within a second runs up and stands before Kim in the air, holding his weapon to attack him. Taram, with an evil smile on his face, calls out Kim's name. Kim stares at him and surprisingly thinks he is faster than anyone he has ever seen. After this, within a second, Kim activates his physical enhancement ability, and the bright wavy light starts coming out of his body. The window appears before him and his physical enhancement ability activates awakened mode on. Harem strikes his weapon to attack Kim, but before he attacks, Kim extends his hand to stop that weapon. Kim tries to save himself, but Harem strikes his weapon and slashes Kim's arms and chest, then jumps down. The blood spurts out of Kim's arm, and the notification window appears before him. His physical armor has been ignored. However, the whole sky was red, and in the city, military helicopters were flying. A man named Yubinshin, the official player ranking 4th, was standing on the rooftop. Looking at the situation of the whole city, he sighs, saying what a complete mess. Then he asks himself if the fire dragon truly awakened. Meanwhile, his mobile phone vibrates. He takes out his mobile from his pocket and sees there is an emergency notice on his mobile. Seeing this, he sighed on the other side. A girl named Yui, the official player ranking 99. She was streaming the whole situation of the city. She poured the video, and many people were added to her video chat. She waved her hand, greeted everyone, and recorded the outdoor situation of the city. She was doing her outdoor recording by attaching the mobile phone with a selfie stick. Then she pointed the mobile camera at her back, asking the viewers if everyone could see this. The sky is red in Inshin right now. Then, while streaming, she, with a surprised face, asks the viewers if this means that the fire dragon is waking up. As she was pouring the same emergency notice given to her mobile, she checked the notice and then sighed while the viewers asked her what was wrong with Yui. The same emergency notice was given to the official players of rank 14, 68, and 32. They all checked the emergency notice. This notice was about martial law declared, and they are summoning up the top 100 players. On Kim's side, the blood drop was dripping from his body, and he was surprisingly looking toward the blood that was rapidly flowing from his body. And falling to the ground, he looks toward the blood, surprisingly asking what he is bleeding, then thinks while he is in his awakened mode. And the system just mentioned that his physical armor was ignored. After this, Harem, placing his sword on the shoulder, stands before Kim and asks him if this is the man that everyone has been making a fuss about. Kim heatedly looks toward him. Then, looking up, he says how disappointing Kim is. He remains silent, then looks toward the tattoo on Harem's body, thinking that tattoo he must be from the Shield Guild. However, Kim sighed, thinking what bad timing, his priority was stopping the fire dragon. Then he turned, saying that Harem got lost. He doesn't have the time to play around with him. As Kim steps ahead, Harem strikes his sword on the ground, and the fire emerges from the ground upward, and the ground gets cracked. Then Harem, angrily looking toward Kim, says he doesn't have to worry about the fire dragon. He is going to die right there right now. Kim stands there, turns, and silently looks toward him. While the blood drops were rapidly flowing from his body, Kim pulled his physical armor off of his body and tore it from his body. Then he makes a fist with his hand and jumps toward Harem to punch him, answering, "Let's get this over with." He punched Harem with all his might. A bright light emanated from there upward, and the dust smoke spread there. As soon as the dust and smoke disappear, Kim plops on the ground there, and Harem stands before him, pointing his sword toward him. Sees this, the director with his subordinate stand up on the cliff and laugh with a cigarette in his mouth, and then he takes the cigarette out of his mouth and laughs loudly. Kim sits there injured, and Harem stands before him, holding his weapon. Then the sound of a crash crumble, and a thud comes out of that red barrier shield. Kim's team members stand outside the barrier shield and get speechless, and the vice captain squeezes his eyes, thinking is there nothing they can do. Meanwhile, Gu, with her subordinates, gets there from behind. The vice captain turns his head and looks toward her, and then they all turn and look toward her, saying Prime Minister. Gu asks the vice captain where is their Captain Kim and why they haven't entered the dungeon, yet the vice captain replies well she sees. The fire dragon's barrier blocked them off, madam. Hearing this, Gu steps toward the shield barrier and touches it to check. After checking it, she stands back to them and tells them this barrier wasn't made by the fire dragon. Vice captain surprisingly asks what she grits, thinking this barrier was made by the Shield Guild. Then she abuses the Shield Guild, asking herself if they went this far to kill Kim. Meanwhile, the media people holding their accessories get to that location and start capturing the pictures, making videos, and writing all the details. Gu turns her head and looks toward them, and the news reporters from different news channels holding the mic to record that scene. One of them says, "This is NBC News broadcasting live in front of the fire dragon." The other news reporter says, "This is CMM, they are live at the scene of this horrible catastrophe, they will be back with more information very soon." Sees this, Gu looking toward her subordinate angrily says, "Get those reporters under control immediately." One of them, subordinate looking ahead, replies, "That's impossible, madam." News agencies from all around the world have already gathered in the area. Hearing this, Gu clench her teeth. On Kim's side, Harem attacks and splits Kim's body. The blood spurts out of his body, and seeing this, Harem gives an evil smile. Kim was about to fall backward when Harem attacked him again with his sword and severely injured him. Seeing this, the director stands on the cliff laughing, saying, "The Chaos Dragon Fang Sword. It's the Vice Guildmaster's ultimate weapon, which he obtained from a 7-star dungeon." Then stands there, he laughs, saying, "Despite its gigantic size, the Chaos Dragon Fang is as light as a feather to its wielder, and its blade can cut through the toughest metals." Hearing this, Shield Guild members stand behind the director, says he thinks he has heard about it, sir. The Chaos Dragon Fang is a mythic tier weapon, the highest tier weapon there is. As the Shield Guild member was about to complete his sentence, the director added his point, saying, "That's right. But its lightweight and razor-sharp blade aren't the only things that make it a mythic tier weapon. The Chaos Dragon Fang is also enchanted with various magical effects, and its most well-known enchantment is." On Kim's side, Harem slices his body with his sword, and the window appears before Kim. The damage reflection, all damage inflicted on the Chaos Dragon Fang is reflected to the opponent. Hearing this, Kim says now he gets it, and Harem stands before him holding his sword, and surprisingly looks toward him. Further, Kim says he was getting injured from his attack earlier, then he asks armor penetration and a damage reflection effect. That's quite an impressive weapon. Hearing this, Harem angrily looked toward Kim, remained silent, then clenched his sword, saying so he still had the energy to talk on his last breath. He swings his sword to attack Kim to kill him also. His eyes turn red due to anger, and then he jumps and slices Kim's body with his sword. After splitting Kim's body, Harem jumps down behind him, and Kim's head stands there, and the blood spurts out of Kim's body. Then Kim turns his head and looks toward Harem. He takes the weapon in his hand and gives it to him. Then he extends his hand toward Harem, saying it will be perfect for his subordinates. Harem turns his head and looks toward Kim angrily. Then he shouts at Kim, asking how is he still alive after losing so much blood. Kim scratched his head and remained silent. Then he answered, "Well, he has a little more blood than most people," and then his status window appeared before him. On his HP was mentioned. As his HP was a little less than before, the window appeared before him, and the majority of the damage he took was from his attacks. Hearing the sound of that window, Kim in his mind silently told the system it was all his fault for giving him the information so late. He was useless, and the system replied to him by showing the silent face emoji. However, Harem stands there looking toward Kim Grit, then jumps toward him holding his sword, saying he has had enough of this nonsense. Kim stands there silently watching Harem holding his sword, quickly coming toward him and answering, well, he is the one who started all of this. However, Kim clenched his fist to punch Harem with all his might. A bright light spread all around there upward. After that, Kim stands there with his punch on Harem's sword, while Harem is pushing Kim backward. Both do their part to push each other. As Kim pushes to push Harem, blood spurts out wherever Kim's body is cut. The window appears before Kim and his damage has been reflected. Hearing this, Kim presses his lower lip. Harem, while pressing his sword, thinks Kim a maniac. Then he glances aside, asking himself, if is this powerful? Blood starts dripping out Kim's mouth, and he stands there, says Harem, as he expects his attacks to hurt. Then he clenches his fist, asking so his sword has a damaged reflection. Then he stands there holding that sword with his one hand. And with his other hand, he clenches his fist, saying, well, let's see just how much damage it can reflect. Kim's window status appears before him, and his HP is getting down. Meanwhile, the fire dragon started roaring in the shield, as that fire dragon was so big that when it shook, almost half of the city crashed. The red shield starts to crack when the fire dragon throws storm fire from its mouth toward the red shield. And that barrier stops the dragon there. It tries to damage it with its fire as well. It doesn't stop attacking once at the barrier. The fire dragon attacks the barrier again with the firestorm, and that barrier starts crumbling. Sees this, the director and Shield Guild members stand behind, look up toward the barrier, and get surprised. After this, the director stands there and starts smoking, while the Shield Guild member stands behind him fearfully, looking up to call out the director. But the director keeps smoking and calmly asks them to calm down further. He says breaking an 8-star dungeon barrier from within is extremely difficult. That's why a high-level dungeon break doesn't occur very often. And they still had some time left. Even a fire dragon can't force a dungeon to break so easily. The fire dragon was roaring and started throwing a firestorm in the city. The director looked up toward the dragon monster thinking, even though he said that an 8-star boss is no joke. Then he takes out that daystone from his pocket and holds it in his hand, stare it thinking the barrier is slowly whittling down. They might have to use the daystone sooner than they expected. Staring at the daystone, he clenched it, then standing up the cliff he glanced toward the explosion that occurred. Then looking toward the explosion that occurred from the area where Kim and Harem were fighting, the director says hopefully the situation will be settled before they have to do that. Meanwhile, Kang gets there and stands beside the director asking situation. What situation? The director looking down replies well he is referring to Kim. Kang stands beside the director, putting his hand on his head to stare at that explosion. The director heads up and looks toward Kang standing beside him. He gets surprised and raises his voice asking who is this kid? Then he raises his voice ordering Shield Guild member, he is the one who was with Kim, get him. Hearing this, Kang runs away while the Shield Guild member runs after him to catch him. On Kim's side, he clenches his fist and keeps punching Harem's sword, while Harem stands there keeping his sword before Kim and pushing him. While punching the sword, Kim gets the notification window that the Chaos Dragon Fang's effect has been activated. His damage has been reflected. Kim heard the voice of the window stop there while the blood was dripping from his mouth. As soon as Kim stops punching the sword, Harem stands before Kim keeping his sword before Kim, gives an evil smile saying he fools his body and will pay the price for his stupidity. Moreover, Harem was certain of his victory. No physical attack could escape the damage reflections effect. Kim's great power only meant that he would suffer more damage. This battle had already been decided. When a physical damage dealer decided to fight against the Chaos Dragon Fang, Harem looked toward Kim and smiled saying give it up, he already had no chance of. But before he completed his sentence, Kim punched the sword and clanged it. The bright light emerged out of the sword where Kim punched. As he punched the sword, the blood spurted out of Kim's wounds. The window appears before him and his damage has been reflected. Harem looks toward Kim and smiles, calling him an idiot. Kim doesn't stop there and again clangs the sword with all his might, while the blood from his wounded body is splashing, and he squeaks there. Kim jumped toward the sword and kept clanging it with all his might, and the bright light was emerging from his punch and spread there. Kim keeps clanging the sword with all his might and Harem holding his sword falters backward. As they both were standing on the cliff and there they were fighting, as soon as Kim clanged the sword, Harem pushed backward, surprisingly thinking how is he being pushed back right now. However, the military helicopter gathers up the red shield and Gu with her subordinate stands out that shield. Standing outside the shield, Gu and Kim's team members hear the sound of a clang crash coming from that dragon shield, get worried, and the vice captain standing behind them worriedly calls out the prime minister standing above him. Gu hears that sound of grit thinking the tremors are not from the fire dragon. Then she calls out Kim's name. While calling out Kim's name, she touches the red shield thinking the shield guild's barrier should she just force her way. Meanwhile, Gu's subordinate stands behind her and tells her she must refrain herself, madam. Then the subordinate with a sad face head down says she understands how she feels, but she is currently their country's commander-in-chief. If she abandons her post, the raid against the fire dragon will almost certainly fail even with the top 100 players. And if that happens, the Republic of Korea will be finished. Hearing this, Gu stands beside the red shield and clenches her teeth answering she knows it and she is aware of that already. On Kim's side, the explosion occurred due to the clanging of the sword. Suddenly Kim stopped there to clang Harem's sword. See this? He gulped thinking he finally stopped attacking. Then he asked himself, is it over now? Kim heads up and looks toward Harem while the blood is flowing from his mouth and body. As soon as Kim looks toward him, he gives an evil smile considering Kim the monster. Harem holding his sword stands near the edge of the cliff and Kim stands ahead of him. Then Kim clenches his fist to punch the sword saying keep blocking. This time Kim doesn't punch the sword but he crashes it with his elbow and the bright light emerges from there where Kim was crashing the sword. Kim kept crashing the sword and a light explosion occurred there while Harem holding his sword was pushing it toward Kim. After crashing it, Kim punched the sword and clanged it, then he kept clanging and crashing sword. However, it was the bizarre sight that one side kept attacking while the other side blocked. but it was the attacker's body that kept spilling more blood. Harem stands there blocking Kim's attack and starts to tremble, then standing at the edge of the cliff. He falters, then he coughs and blood spits out of his mouth. Harem gets internally injured and stands there at the edge holding his sword. He surprisingly asks himself, how is this possible, and how is he receiving any damage? The Chaos Dragon Fang's effect should have, and then he got silent while his sword got a little cracked. Sees the sword cracking before him, Harem's eyes wide open, and holding his sword, sits before Kim while the blood is flowing from his mouth. He silently looks toward Kim, and Kim stands before him and says he told him to keep blocking his attack. Hearing this, Harem shudders and looks up toward Kim. Then Kim clenched his fist to clang the sword. As he extended his hand, Harem sat there fearfully shouting about what to hold on to. But Kim punches the sword and crashes it. Harem falls from the cliff holding his sword, and Kim also jumps after him. Harem falls to the ground keeping his sword before him, and Kim keeps crashing his sword. As Kim punches his sword, he sinks into the ground. Kim keeps crashing his sword, and that sword starts cracking, and the bright light emerges. There also Harem keeps sinking into the ground. However, the sword cracks and Harem coughs. Blood spurts out of his mouth. Kim stands on him, punches the sword, and slices it. Kim, slicing the sword, extended his fist to punch Harem in his face. Kim punched his face with all his might and sank him into the cracked ground. Kim destroyed Harem's face by punching him, and he fainted. Then Kim turned and looked toward that broken sword lying there. A bright light was emerging from Kim's head. On Kang's side, he was running with joy, and Shield Guild members were also running after him tiredly. After knowing that Kim has won the battle, he stops there on the cliff and excitedly points toward the Shield Guild members, informing them Kim won his fight. Hearing this, the Shield Guild's members get shocked and look down toward the light that spreads all around there. That light was a signal of Kim's victory. Sees that light, they were speechless. On Kim's side, he picks up the broken piece of sword and stares at it, thinking what a waste he broke the sword. While the Shield Guild member stands up on the cliff, gets surprised, and then looks down toward Harem and says it's impossible, the Vice Guild Master lost. Sees this, the director stands there up on the cliff with a cigarette in his mouth and remains silent. However, the Vice Guild Master Harem was unquestionably one of the top 3 players in South Korea. Nobody had anticipated his loss in this battle. Up until now, the Shield Guild has gotten away with numerous crimes because they wielded such incredible power. But that unquestionable authority had just been shattered by a single player known as Jibong Kim. After this, one of the Shield Guild members stands aside from the director and asks him what they should do with the plan. Now, the director remains silent. The Shield Guild's original plan went like this. They were going to lure in Kim by awakening the fire dragon, have Vice Guild Master Harem kill Kim, and then use the Daystone to put the dragon back into slumber. The world would have seen Kim as a hero who sacrificed his life to stop the fire dragon, but he would have been quickly forgotten. And once Kim was out of the picture, the Korean government would have been forced to rely on the Shield Guild for the capital city's defense. And the Shield would have been revered as the heroes who defended the nation from the fire dragon. That was how things were originally supposed to unfold. The director stands there, squeezes his eyes, and looking down toward the light, says they are falling back and tells everyone to prepare their recall stones. Hearing this, the Shield Guild members get silent and scared, and one of them surprisingly asks the director, "What about the Daystone, sir? The fire dragon will break the dungeon barrier if they don't use it." The director squeezes his eyes and replies the raid against the fire dragon is unlikely to succeed even with the top 100 players in this country. And since many of the top 100 players are also their guild members, the raid will be almost impossible if they decide not to be involved. Hearing this, the Shield Guild member says, "But sir, if they do that," as he is about to complete his sentence, the director laughs, saying, "Don't worry, they will make their dramatic appearance at the end of the battle," and shut down the fire dragon using the Daystone. Hearing this, the Shield Guild member becomes speechless. Then the director clenched the Daystone, saying it will be different from their original plan, but they will ultimately still come out as the heroes who defended the country. Once that happens, even the Prime Minister will not be able to condemn them. Then he turns and raises his voice, ordering them to come on, let's go, and the Shield Guild members move from their replaying. "Yes, sir." Then they stop there and, looking toward the Harem, asked the director about the Vice Guild Master. The director smirked, answering, and they left him there. Hearing this, the Shield Guild member surprisingly asks what, But he is their vice guildmaster, sir. The director angrily looks toward him, asking if he would rather go down there and rescue him from that monster himself. Kim stands down and looks up toward the cliff. There the director and the Shield Guild members stand. As Kim is looking up, the director stands up, looks down toward Kim, and flicks the cigarette down. As there the director and the Shield Guild members stand on the cliff, the magic spreads all around them, and they all excrete the dungeon. Sees this, Kim looks up toward the cliff and sighs. Meanwhile, Kang gets there, asking him if he isn't going to go after them. Kim turns his head, looks toward him, and sighs, answering forget about them. They have a much more urgent problem to take care of. Meanwhile, the fire dragon starts to roar and begin releasing the fireball from his mouth, and then it throws the firestorm toward the Shield Guild barrier. The barrier begins to crack, and the news reporter stands outside the barrier and gets scared. After this, Gu's subordinate sits there aside and uses her phone system, informing Gu that 89% of the barrier has been destroyed, madam. They have 5 minutes until the dungeon break commences. Hearing this, Gu stands aside, clenches her teeth, and one of her subordinate males stands behind her and says Gu, she aids 5 minutes. Madam, then he requests her to order the player to step in immediately. Meanwhile, the bright light spreads in the barrier shield, and that light slowly starts to fade away. Sees this, the news reporter stands outside the barrier and looks up toward the light, saying, look, the barrier is going down. They all get scared as soon as the light fades away, and the fire dragon begins to see through that shield barrier. Sees that fire dragon in the shield barrier. The reporter and Gu's subordinate gulp, asking if that's the fire dragon. The news reporter was recording the whole situation, and the Lady Gu's subordinate, while using her phone system, asked them to wait and then said the barrier had yet to be completely broken. Then she tapped the screen of her mobile system, telling them that it was only a separate white layer that was taken down. Hearing this, Gu touches the shield barrier and thinks the removed layer is the Shield Guild's barrier. Furthermore, she grits, thinking then, which means that Kim has already been, as she heads down with a sad face and touches the barrier, thinking. Meanwhile, the news reporter stands there and raises their voice, saying there are some people inside the barrier. Hearing this, Gu heads up and quickly looks toward the barrier, saying it couldn't be. From that shield barrier, 2 men were seen standing there, and these men were Kim and Kang. Sees this, the news reporter stands there and starts recording and getting the signal from the signal antenna, while Gu's subordinate stands in the distance and surprisingly looks toward them. The news reporter, while recoding, moves his camera toward Taram's body lying there on the ground. Sees this, his companion tells him to hold on a second and check that person lying on the ground. Then he surprisingly asks, isn't that the Shield Guild's Vice Guild Master Taram, and his companion replies yes, he thinks that's him, he has seen him on the TV before. Hearing this, Gu stands there, sighs and smiles, then she gulps and looks toward the shield and thinks he defeated Taram. Kim is that powerful. Then she turned, asking her subordinate if there was a way for them to reach him from there. They needed to get Kim out of there immediately. Her subordinate replies they are trying to contact him, but the dungeon is interfering with the connection. Meanwhile, the fire dragon starts roaring, and hearing the sound of the dragon, they all get scared. The fire dragon roars and throws the firestorm toward the shield barrier. Sees this, Gu's subordinate, checking her phone system, informs them the dungeon has been broken down by 7%. They are extremely close to a dungeon break. Madam, hearing this, Gu stands behind and gets scared. Then she clenches her teeth, thinking they need to delay it. Somehow, they can't let the fire dragon unleash in the city like this. Then she turned her head and looked toward the news reporter, and players thought it was not like this. They are not already there. There are only about 30 of the top players right now, but they need to gather at least 80 of them to do anything. As she stands there thinking this, all her subordinates stands behind her and say, Prime Minister, they have established a connection with Kim. Hearing this, she turns her head and quickly moves toward her and then grabs the wireless phone from her hand, saying give her that. Holding the phone, she loudly asks who is this, is there anyone, is this not Kim? Kang, wearing an earpiece, replies from inside the shield, no, this is HWI Kang. Gu shouted at him to put Kim on the line immediately, and he replied okay, madam. Also, Kim was standing beside him. Kim wore that earpiece, saying Kim was speaking. Hearing this, Gu asked Kim if he was all right as one of the earpieces was in Kang's ear and the other one was in Kim's ear. Kang stands beside Kim and answers Gu yes, he guesses, and then Kim answers her he is still okay. Hearing this, she says then, and then she stops there and presses her lips. Kim waits for her to speak, but she doesn't talk. Then Kim asks her what she needs him to do, madam. Gu stands there pressing her lips, then after a minute, she answers they need more time. She needs him to stall some time for them. However, she was asking him to die for them. This was essentially no different from a death sentence. Hearing this, Kim's answer understood. Then the call ended, and the mobile fell from her hand and thuds on the ground. She stands there silently before the shield barrier. On the other side, the news reporter, while recording, stands outside the shield barrier and looks toward Kim and Kang standing there. He turns his camera toward them, asking the viewers, ladies and gentlemen, if they are witnessing this. The man who was found inside the fire dragon nest is walking in even deeper right now. He seems to be heading towards the fire dragon, judging by the direction in which he has traveled. As he was recording this, the news was on the news channel. Moreover, a man standing behind Gu, pointing toward Kim in the shield barrier, shouts, asking who he is and what he thinks he is doing right now. Is he even aware of what's at stake there? Gu turns her head and angrily looks toward him, answering to shut his mouth, and he flinches. Then she answers him that man is the hope and future of this country, and she has just ordered him to walk toward his death for the rest of them to live. However, Kim stands there inside the shield barrier, injured and moving toward the fire dragon. While moving toward it, he activated his physical enhancement ability, and his status window appeared before him on which his strength, mana, agility, and everything was mentioned. Also, his HP was decreased as it was about to expire. However, Kim stepped ahead injured. Also, his energies were activated and the bright, wavy light was emerging from his body. Also, the blood was dripping from his body. The system warned him, and the notification window appeared before him. He had less than 8% of his HP left. Rest is recommended to replenish his health. Hearing the voice from that window, Kim stood there and thought he also wanted to take a rest. Another window appears before Kim, showing that his HP is constantly decreasing due to the bleeding. Taking a rest is recommended. Kim silently stands there communicating with the system, and hearing the voice of that window, he replies he can't do that. Also, Kang stands with him at a little distance. Hearing this, the system gets surprised and remains silent, then replies, asking him if he does not understand why. Furthermore, a window appeared on which it was written he could easily escape from this location instead of choosing to fight. Kim replies no, everything in this area will be destroyed if he runs away. His mother will be in danger if he lets that happen. The system sends another window to him, and this time he asks Kim then how about escaping to another country with his mother. Hearing this, Kim looks up toward the window and thinks he is the worst, and the system apologizes to him for this. As Kim stood there, he was communicating with the system, and Kang stood there to call his name. Kim turned his head and looked toward him. Then Kang asks him if he is going to fight this dragon, as the dragon is so big that they stand before it looking like tiny dots. Kim, looking toward the fire dragon, replies yes, they need to defeat it, and Kang surprisingly asks. Then, with a surprised face, he says, but it's so powerful, he asks how they defeated it ever. Meanwhile, the fire dragon throws the firestorm toward them with its breath. A huge heated explosion occurred there, and it destroyed half of the city. However, the shield barrier starts rumbling, and Gu's subordinate stands outside the shield barrier, checking her mobile system. She raises her voice, saying an intense heat explosion has been detected within the barrier. They presume it to be the fire dragon's breath. Then, looking toward the barrier, she says the barrier has yet to be destroyed. But the flames are too strong for them to see what's inside anymore. Hearing this, Gu looks toward the shield barrier grit and remains silent, thinking about Kim. However, inside the shield, the fire dragon keeps attacking them with its breathing fire and destroys the surrounding area. But before the fire hit them, Kang created the shield above them and saved them from that firestorm. Kang stands there creating the shield and says he barely managed to block it. Hearing this, Kim stands behind him and says he has said this before, but that's an interesting ability. It doesn't quite feel like it's Gi, but as he was about to complete his sentence, Kang turned his head, saying yes, it's something similar to Gi, but it's actually as Kang was about to finish his sentence. But before he completes his sentence, the fire dragon hits him with its tail. The shield breaks, and he falls through the shield. Kang thuds on the ground away, and Kim stands there in the broken shield, turns his head, and looks toward him. Kang thuds on the ground so hard that his nose starts to bleed and his head starts to spin. Therefore, Kim, looking toward him, says he didn't finish his explanation again. Then, looking toward the fire dragon, he says, well, then he guess it's just he versus him now. Kim's eyes start to glow, and he looks up toward the fire dragon and says, bring it on, the oversized lizard. The fire dragon roars and extends its claw to attack Kim. The fire dragon crashes the ground where Kim stands and crumbles it, but Kim jumps up from the crash ground, sees the fire dragon roar, and extends its hands to hit Kim. As soon as the fire dragon sees him before him in the air, Kim disappears, and the fire dragon turns around to find him. But as the fire dragon turned round, its tail crashed into many buildings. The dust smoke spread there, and Kim appeared from that smoke. Kim stands there under the fire dragon's tail, holding it with his left hand. Also, the area where Kim stands is crushed by the weight. Kim's wounds split, and blood spurts out of his body, and the window of warning appears before him, while the blood from his body is dripping. Then another window appears before him that he has less than 7% of his HP from the bleeding. The fire dragon roars, and the fireball is created on its head. It quickly steps toward Kim, and Kim stands there holding its tail, and the explosion occurs on its tail side. Sees that explosion, the fire dragon turns and looks toward its tail, while the round magic circle is created all around Kim. However, Kim punched the dragon's tail and threw it away while the magic round shield made all around Kim. As soon as Kim threw its tail, the dragon roared, and Kim ran and jumped up toward the dragon. While jumping up, he clenches his fist to punch the dragon. The fire dragon sees him before he roars. Kim, surrounded by his power, jumped from place to place very quickly, punched the dragon with all his might, and cracked it. The dragon roars while Kim stands there in the air with his bright, wavy light. Then Kim punches it again and crashes it on the ground. The fire dragon thuds and falls away on the ground, and a dust explosion occurs there while Kim stands there making a fist of his hand. The window appears before him that his HP is 4%, and his HP is taking additional recoil damage from his attacks. Hearing that voice, Kim sighed, clenched his teeth, jumped up with his lightning energy in the barrier shield, and then jumped down toward the dragon to punch him. As Kim was on his way in the air to arrive near the dragon, meanwhile, the injured dragon lying there got up angrily, looked toward Kim, and created a firestorm in its mouth. Then the dragon turned and threw the firestorm from its breath toward Kim as Kim moved toward it quickly to punch it. Sees the firestorm coming toward him, Kim gets surprised and clenches his teeth, thinking this is dangerous. That firestorm hit Kim and fell him down. Therefore, Kim's judgment was indeed correct. The breath of an 8-star fire dungeon was hot enough to melt steel. Even the elemental resistance trait was meaningless in front of these flames. Since he no longer had Kang's support, Kim had to avoid being hit by this fatal attack. Kim falls on the barrier shield and sits there. He notices the firestorm moving toward the people outside that barrier shield. However, the dragon's breath was flying straight toward his allies, seeing the firestorm coming toward them. The people standing outside the shield got scared. The barrier was already at its limit. It was nearly impossible for it to endure the impact. Sees that firestorm coming toward them, Gu raises her voice, everyone runs. Meanwhile, Kang quickly jumps from one side to the other, then he jumps up above the firestorm and creates the shield with his purple magic aura. However, the firestorm hits with that shield that Kang creates up in the air and stands there holding it, and due to that shield, the firestorm is unable to cross the shield barrier. Sees this, Gu and her subordinates get surprised. Then Gu grits, thinking, who is that supposed to be? The people standing there are amazed, and they are watching Kang holding his purple magic shield before the firestorm. The firestorm was so heated, and due to its heat, the purple shield started to crack. Then, an explosion of fire occurred there, and Kang fell and thudded in that destroyed building. Kang crashed there, and then he excitedly got up and lifted his hands, saying he did it. The dragon fire roared, and Kim looked toward him, slightly smiling. Kim stands up in the air, smiles, and talks with Kang with the help of a wireless earpiece. He touches his earpiece button and cooperates with Kang in his work. Kang stands there in the destroyed building, touches his earpiece, looks up and smiles, answering it is nothing, Captain Kim. However, Kim stands in the air and moves toward the fire dragon, saying alright, then let's finish this. The dragon roars and Kim stands up on its wing. The dragon, with all its power, creates a huge fireball on the other side. Kim, with all his might, makes his bright, wavy light punch. Moreover, the bright light spread all around Kim. His eyes start to glow, and his punch is covered with his bright light. Kim's colorful light wave extended toward the dragon while the dragon was creating its fireball storm, and then from that bright light, Kim quickly moved toward the dragon to punch it. However, both energies collapsed, and Kim hit the dragon. Due to this punch, the dragon's body started to crack, and from wherever its body burst, Kim's bright light flashes emerged. The fire dragon was about to fall backward, and then its body started to crash, and the flashlight emerged from the dragon. However, Kim stands there, clenching his fist while the bright, wavy light emerges from his fist. Stands there, he gets the notification window that the boss has been successfully defeated. He is the first player to clear the 8-star field dungeon, the Fire Dragon's Nest. The bright, wavy light starts coming out of Kim's body, and the window appears before him. His strength has increased, and his agility and power have increased. Furthermore, his stats have reached their maximum values, converting his extra stats into currency points, and his remaining points are 3,694,831 P. Also, he has obtained the unique ability of the first Dragon Slayer, and the Dragon Fear ability is now available. He deals 50% more damage against draconic monsters. The fire dragon thuds to the ground dead, and Kim stands there sighing. His stats window appears before him as all his statuses were the same, but his HP has decreased to the lowest point. However, the dead fire dragon was lying on the cracked ground with its mouth open, and Kim stood ahead of its body. Kim was standing there injured, clenched his fist, and there the window appeared before him, and the system warned him that his HP was below 3%, and he needed healing. Kim sighed, hearing that system's robotic warning voice, and replied, "All right, he gets it. He is tired enough without his nagging right now." Meanwhile, Kang excitedly jumps and gets behind him, waving his hand and calling Kim's name. Kim turns his head and looks toward him. Kang excitedly asked him if he had just seen his block the fire dragon's attack. Wasn't it amazing? Kim was exhausted while the voice from either side was going into his ears. On one side, the system continuously warned him and suggested that he rest. On the other side, Kang continuously asked him if it wasn't amazing. However, Kim stands there and notices something behind him. He turns his head and looks back toward the fire dragon's body. The fire dragon's body, the dragon's heart in particular, was an enormous mass of energy. However, Kim killed the dragon before it could deplete most of its power. As a result of the excess energy left in its corpse, both Kim and Kang turn their head and look toward the dead dragon's body. However, the fire dragon's body bursts out like a supernova, and the shield barrier rumbles while Gu and the people standing outside the barrier get scared. Gu's subordinate stands behind her search on her mobile system, saying they are detecting more energy from the fire dragon. This is the largest amount they have seen so far. Hearing this, Gu grits, asking herself what kind of battle is going on in there. Meanwhile, her subordinate stands behind her and calls her name, informing her they have gathered all of the top players in the country except for those affiliated with the Shield Guild. Further, they have their troops standing by for fire support. Gu remains silent and presses her lips, and then she takes out her magic sword with her magical power. As the sword appeared in her hand, she stood there and raised her voice, saying she was breaking through the barrier and preparing all units to enter the battlefield. Then she extended her hand toward the shield barrier to join there, but as soon as she raised her hand, she was surprised to see the ashes start coming out of the shield barrier. As the ashes came from the barrier and fell in the air, people outside the barrier stared at the ashes and extended their hands to catch them. From that crowd of people, a top player girl looking toward the ashes says, "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears to be snowing outside." Gu stares at the ash before her. She remains silent, and her mouth wide open, and the ash collides with her hand and ends. Gu understands that this isn't the snow. She quickly runs toward the shield barrier and enters. Sees this, her subordinates get surprised, their mouth wide open, and they call their prime minister. Moreover, it was ash, and ashes were falling from the sky. Gu quickly ran into that destructed place, thinking, "Kim, please be alive." While running, she screams because she hears the sound of panting there from the crashed ground. She slightly heads down to check with bated breathing. Meanwhile, the rocks beside her start to crumble. She sees the rocks crumbling, and she calls Kim's name. Meanwhile, Kang Crush crumbled the rocks and came out to see this. She shut her mouth wide open and called Kim's name, while Kang poked his head out of there, says, "No, it's he HWI Kang." After this, Kang sits up and gets out of that destructed place, and Gu stands there silently, looking toward him. Then she asks him where Kim is. Kang replies he is not sure. Then he puts his hand on his forehead and looks around to find Kim, and finally he finds him. Then he waved his hand and called Gu's name while she was looking aside and lost in her thoughts. She looked toward him, and he pointed ahead toward the destroyed building, telling her Kim was there. Kim, standing against the wall of the broken structure, sees him there. She remained silent for a second, and then she quickly stepped toward Kim. Looking toward Kim, she slightly smiles, saying "Good work, Captain," and in response, he sighs and slightly smiles. However, Kim's status window appeared there, and his HP was about to end. Meanwhile, the military helicopter got to that area. In the Bang B Seoul Shield Guild headquarters, a Shield Guild member quickly steps toward the director's office. He slams the door and enters, calling the director. As the director stands before the mirror wall, looking outside and looking toward the director, the member of the Shield Guild informs they have just received some reports from the Fire Dragon's Nest. As he was about to complete his sentence, the director stood there adding his point, saying he had heard it already. Then he asks the director what they should do now, and the director remains silent and keeps smoking. Then he flicks his cigarette on the floor. Then move and step ahead, looking toward the director. The Shield Guild member is surprised and remains silent. However, the director goes toward the door and sees this. The Shield Guild member stands behind in worry and calls the director, but the director doesn't listen to him and keeps stepping toward the door, putting his hands in his pants pocket. Therefore, the news was reported on all the TV channels. The South Korean government has officially announced that the 8-star dragon in Incheon, the Fire Dragon's Nest, has been cleared. Furthermore, it was reported that the Ministry of National Defense launched a private operation to clear the dungeon, and they are going to hold an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister. Additionally, they have just received some breaking news that the police have arrested the Vice Guild Master of the Shield Guild, Taram, along with his followers. The report says that Prime Minister Gu personally directed the operation to apprehend all of the perpetrators, and the Shield Guild is being held responsible for the recent crisis with the Fire Dragon and all of their members involved. The incident is expected to face serious charges, including treason for their crimes. However, the Shield Guild's director, James Lee, has been reported to still be on the run. He is presumed to be one of the main perpetrators of the incident and is currently wanted by the police. After telling this all, the news reporter moved ahead to the next announcement by the government on the other side. In the headquarters of Audit, the journalist and interviewer were working there to take Gu interview to collect the news. Also, media people were there. Gu got there at the conference table, and the reporter asked her questions about that recent incident. Gu stands there with the dice before Mike, and the reporter asks her questions, and the media is recording all this. She starts her speech with a smile, and then she gives a little introduction about herself. She is the Prime Minister of Seongryong-gu, and she is so grateful to see all of them again. The news reporter stands there and tells her about their news channel. One of them says, "Prime Minister, they are from Nav News." The other one says, "This is Daily." After this, one of them asked her if she could give them a detailed explanation of the recent crisis in Incheon. She answered she was sure they all listened to the announcement on the news, but the question on everyone's mind right now is not how, but who diverted the recent crisis. Then she extended her and pointed aside a smile, saying so, allowing her to introduce the captain of the Special Dungeon Control Team, Jibong Kim. Kim stands there wearing his uniform. A bright light falls on his. He stands there, sighs, and steps ahead toward the dice. As soon as he steps forward, the media stands there and starts capturing his picture. He stands there and flinches backward, then he smiles and moves to the dice before the mic. He stands there, greets them all, and then starts his speech, saying he is the captain of the Dungeon Control Team, Jibong Kim. The next day, Kim and Kang go to meet Lieutenant Yoon at her military base office. Both of them enter Kim in a decent way, piping ahead while Kang wakes and hums steps there. As they both were stepping forward, Yoon got there, holding the file, and called Kim from behind. Kim stands there, turns his head, and looks aside toward her while Kang stands beside Kim, turns his head behind Kim, and looks toward her. Yoon looked toward Kim's smile, saying Greta's work. She saw what he did out there. Hearing this, Kang quickly turned ahead toward her excitedly, asking what about him. Did she see him too? Sees this, Kim scratches his head, answering thanks. Yoon and Yoon, seeing Kang's childlike behavior, smile and put his hand in her mouth, answering him. Of course, he was amazing too, Mr. Kang. Hearing this, Kang excitedly clenched his fist, and sometimes he turned his head and looked toward Kim, asking if he had heard Kim, and sometime at Yoon, saying he was amazing too. Kim grabbed his ear, twisted it hard, and got near him, saying in his ear, "Quiet down." Kang sweated and shouted in pain, answering, "Okay, boss." See this? Yoon laughs, and Kang's head is down with a sad face, and his ears turn red. After this, Yoon looks towards Kim and asks if this must be his first time there. Right, he replies yes, while Kang stands behind him and listens to them. Then Kim answers her, saying this is his first visit today. Then Kim looks toward the strange equipment and people gather in the back of the room. He asks Yoon who those people are in the back of the room are. Yoon hears this, gets surprised and remains silent, then replies that he is the national hero who saved their country, Kim. Hearing this, Kim silently looked toward the people there as they were media and press reporters and they were setting their accessories. Kang looks toward Kim, and those people clench their fists. However, Yoon smiles, saying to Kim that everyone's attention is focused on him right now, and Kang stands beside Kim, clenching his fist excitedly, looking toward her to show her that he is too. Also, when Kang excitedly looks toward her, the light flash gathers there, and his eyes start to glow. Yoon smiles, looking toward Kang, says of course, he is a national hero as well, Mr. Kang. She has heard that he already has his fan club. Kang blushes his eyes and he excitedly asks. However, Kim, seeing Kang's actions, put his hand on his mouth, asking her why he was called a hero today. Yoon stood there looking toward them, smiling, answering no, they wanted him to come for his physical examination today. Further, she says when he first enlisted, they needed to have the proper equipment to examine his body, so his data still needed to be uploaded to their headquarters. Just as she said, Kim was unable to go through an official examination because the army lacked the necessary equipment to assess his strength at the time of his enlistment. Due to this fact, Kim didn't receive a rating in the government database and was able to remain largely unnoticed by the public. But had Kim been ranked in the database, the members of the Shield Guild would not have made such horrible management decisions. Kim stands there, stares at his hand and laughs, then he scratches his head asking so, should we get started right away? Yoon smiles, answering that Mick should be there any minute now. Hearing this, Kim scratched his head and thought about MC. Meanwhile, one of the top players from that 100 players, Yui, the streamer, got there from the door streaming. She held her mobile phone with the selfie stick and was recording. As soon as she entered there, she waved her hand, looking toward her phone.